Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell on Thursday, December 6, 2012, with news and views from the Nefarium. It is the year of the apocalypse, and we are only 15 days away from the apocalypse. So, for those of you wanting to know where our members' vid chats have gone, I am still having them. I'm taking a little break from Thanksgiving up through the end of December. We are going to have a members' vid chat, however, on December 21st, which conveniently is a Friday, so that we could have our members' vid chat during the apocalypse and ride out the galactic storm, the sun being kicked off of its axis, solar flares, cosmic rays, and all of the other apocalyptic events that have been predicted. And if we're still around in 2013, I do plan to get back on my bi-weekly members vid chat schedule beginning in January of 2013. So I'm just taking a little break, folks. Now, why am I calling this part one of News and Views from the Nefarium? Well, it's because when I originally recorded this, I was doing fine, and as usual, YouTube messed up and cut out the first part of my recording. So I went ahead and recorded part two first, and now I'm going back and re-recording part one. So in part one, originally, I made the announcement that I did finish the new book, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. I did it in jig time. This is the second book in what I am projecting is going to be a series of either three, pardon me, 3 or 4 books. Now, the second book, I want to clue everybody in. I'm taking a cue from Mr. Richard Dolan, whose idea the breakaway civilization is. He came up with this idea in his UFOs and National Security State. And in his remarks, he gives a profound clue, and one that I think has never really been adequately explored in depth. And that's the idea that this breakaway civilization arose out of the matrix of the response to communism in the Cold War. So in other words, the breakaway civilization, as I'm understanding him to mean, and as I'm exploring in this book, has deep ties to that covert intelligence and covert operations apparatus that was established primarily in the United States, but in other countries after World War II. So I'm exploring the relationship to the UFO phenomenon from that cultural standpoint. So much of this book is setting up the cultural, the financial, the technological aspects of that culture. And at the end of this book, I'm finally getting around to the issue of UFOs in the context of that culture. And I plan to explore it more fully in either a sequel or sequels. It depends on how much I can do in my projected sequels. Now, as I mentioned, the other announcement I wanted to make is I am taking some time off from writing. I'm planning to take 2 to 3 months off and do nothing but website and research for the next 3 books that I have planned. One of the books that I have planned is Volume 2 of Apocalypse Theater with Dr. DeHart. He and I are discussing the subject matter of that book and trying to lay out ideas. Hopefully our schedules, he's a very busy man, so hopefully our schedules will allow us to do that book. And I'm doing research for 2 other books, one of which will be the sequel to Breakaway Civilizations. And the other of them is going to be on a topic that I've been suggesting and hinting at ever since the Giza Death Star books, the trilogy way back when that started all this. I've been kind of leading up to one of these books, and I've begun research now in a formal way on that. Now, in prepping for this news and views, I want to thank everybody that's been sending me articles. It's truly amazing now to watch how all of you are responding not only to this website but to other websites and gathering all this data and sharing it with so many people. I want to thank you for that. I want to make sure and thank that gentleman in Illinois and that Dear lady, you know who you are for your donations, and everybody else for your donations and memberships. I want to wish everybody, in case I forget, a very Merry Christmas season, a Happy Hanukkah season for those of you of the Jewish faith. But I want to talk about two articles, one of which is a little article that appeared in the Moscow Times about the American post-election flurry of secession petitions. The Russians have had academicians for a number of years that have been predicting the crack-up of the American Union due to a variety of different factors, political, economic mismanagement, and so on. Now, that to me is a kind of an interesting context because it reflects a certain cultural phenomenon that Zbigniew Brzezinski has recently commented on in the last week and a half, and that's what he calls this growing worldwide phenomenon of populism, which is, in his words, resistant to external control. And what he's complaining about, of course, is the phenomenon in Europe, and I would suspect that if we view it that way, the American secession phenomenon is also a part of that movement because, in my opinion, you would have had a similar response regardless of who won the national election. In other words, you're looking at a cultural phenomenon now where America is so badly polarized that regardless of who wins, you're going to have an increasing amount of discontent. And what this is really reflecting, in my opinion, is a growing cynicism toward the entire system, which more and more people are now perceiving, in my opinion, correctly, that the system is only designed and only serves the ruling oligarchy and no one else. And the increasing discontent with both political parties is a reflection of that. Now, it's been argued by many people that America resembles the Weimar Republic in Germany between the two world wars. I'm going to argue on the basis of this article that I was shared by a reader of the website. The article is entitled DIA Sending Hundreds of More Spies Overseas. But the real story of this article, I think, is that America is now Venice. And I'll get to my reasons for saying that in a moment. But the reasons begin up here. If you look right at the top of the article that I'll link, you'll see this little band here of articles under the heading The Permanent War. And beneath that, you have a picture of the Pentagon. And I want you to pause and reflect on the symbolism of the building itself. This is a massive office building that was built by U.S. Army General Leslie Groves in the early 1940s. It was built in jig time, in record time, this enormous building. And what the building itself reflects is the conclusion of the ruling oligarchy in the United States before World War II, that the American military machine would have to be vastly expanded and more or less become a permanent feature of American political, financial, and economic life. It would become a permanent feature of American culture. Now, with that said, I want to point out some very interesting things in this article. As I said, the article is entitled DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, Sending Hundreds of More Spies Overseas. And I want to draw your attention to some statements on the first page of this article. The Pentagon will send hundreds of additional spies overseas as part of an ambitious plan to assemble an espionage network that rivals the CIA in size, U.S. officials said. The project is aimed at transforming the Defense Intelligence Agency, which has been dominated for the past decade by the demands of two wars, into a spy service focused on emerging threats and more closely aligned with the CIA and elite military commando units. These spies will be trained by the CIA, and they will receive their assignments, their espionage assignments, from the Department of Defense. Now, let's stop right there before we go further. What we have is the creation, in other words, of a vastly expanded covert intelligence gathering and, in my opinion, an assassination bureau. In other words, We're completely jettisoning the old idea of fronts, of corporations or this group or that paramilitary group conducting under false flag circumstances covert operations. This is now being done directly, and this signals a huge cultural change, an open admission of something that's been going on since the end of World War II. All right, and we'll get to what I think that is in a minute. Now, the next statement here on page 1 is among the Pentagon's top intelligence priorities, officials said, are Islamicist militant groups in Africa, weapons transfers by North Korea and Iran, and military modernization underway in China. Now, that's a subtle signal, in my opinion, friends, that what the oligarchy is really worried about long term is that it cannot sustain the pace of technological superiority over any potential enemy that it has thus far sustained. And it is now genuinely worried that other nations, China in particular, could overtake it in certain areas or in certain respects. All right, that is a huge admission there as well. Now, before we go on to what I think all of this means, there's two final statements from page 1 that I want to bring to your attention in this Washington Post article. Through its drone program, the CIA now accounts for a majority of lethal U.S. operations outside the Afghan war zone. So in other words, we have been waging a different kind of war. This has largely been a CIA war. And that should be the clue right there, that all of this all along has been an oligarchical war. Why? Because the ties, you're going to read some blogs in the coming days on the website, the tie between the CIA and the financial oligarchy in the United States and the West is very, very deep and profound. And it's not the financial oligarchy that is calling the shots. That's a key clue right there as to what's really going on. Now, what do I think all this means? Well, if we look at American politics, the secession movement, and so on, that happened after the election, as I said, there's this growing perception that Congress is nothing but a front for oligarchical interests masking as something that serves the public. And this is precisely what the Grand Council became in Venice. It became an unwieldy body that was preserved in order to preserve the outward appearance of a republic. But it became unwieldy to the point that no real decision-making was finally done in that body. What happened at a certain period in Venetian history was that the Doges created what they called a Council of 10. That was their National Security Council, and it sat on top of all of the vast Venetian military and intelligence gathering capabilities. It was very much like what has happened in the United States under the National Defense Authorization Act. It was their assassination bureau. It was their intelligence gathering bureau. And in fact, Venetians could literally denounce anyone in the Republic of Venice to the Council of 10 anonymously. And like the National Defense Authorization Act, it had the authority to try you and summarily execute you on the decision of the Doge and his appointed counselors in this council. So what we have in the United States really is a huge recreation of the Venetian Republic. You have all the front institutions of a republic, but the reality is you have an oligarchy whose interests are represented in a very, very small, very secretive council gathered around the Venetian executive. This is what we see happening in the United States right now. So it's an oligarchy. Now, the response to it, I think, as Zbigniew Brzezinski mentions, is only going to grow. And I think this is the reason why you see now a combining of covert operations with the Pentagon and with the CIA with specific geopolitical targeting of nations like China. That's a clue right there, my friends, that what they're really going to do now is include China, Russia, and other potential military and technological threats in their covert operations. There's going to be sabotage in those countries. There's going to be assassinations. They will be conducted under false flags, just like Venice. And just like Venice, we're going to see something else happen. And I think this is the other reason that they are creating this huge expansion of military intelligence capability. Because they are predicting that just like Venice, the world is going to get to a point where it is fed up with that behavior. There was, during Venetian history, a war of all of Europe against that one republic, that one city, because they basically had it with all of the machinations, with all of the backstabbing, with all of the duplicity, with all of the financial manipulation that was being conducted by that oligarchy from its base of power in Venice. Well, we have another oligarchy with a much larger base of power, and it's acting now in defense of that power base. That's what they're really up to here. So look for that to continue. Look for the opposition to continue. I've gone over, I may have repeated some of my remarks in part 2, but I wanted to make sure that you understood that in my original recording I did record 2 different halves. The first recording was lost, so I may have repeated some of my remarks. But in any case, folks, we'll see you on the flip side. Thanks for your support. Thanks for your prayers, and God bless everybody.